Today and tomorrow, I'm going to invite you in my short message to imagine being one of the disciples over today and over tomorrow. You see, you were selected by Jesus to be one of his disciples. You lived up in Galilee, quite a bit north of Jerusalem. Your family was connected to the fishing industry, and you took your faith seriously, though. You were aware of the Torah. You certainly were aware of Jesus, and he was somebody you looked up to. He was, 10, 12 years older than you. You saw him, and you thought he was really something special. And then one day, he called on you. He asked you to join him, to be part of his ministry. You were excited, amazed, afraid, but filled with a type of pride that you've never felt before. And so you said, yes, of course. And over the years, he taught you so much about God's love. He listened to you. He listened deeply to you. He guided you. He paid attention to you every step of the way, and certainly there were times when he corrected you. He was not afraid to get you on the right path. And of course, he always prayed. He prayed for you. He prayed for the other disciples. He was always praying. He was always connected to the Father. He was almost from a different place, but yet his feet were firmly grounded. He was a teacher, to be sure. More than anything else, I think he was a teacher. And he was a defender of the shalom. You noticed how he could be so gentle, so soft, so connected, and then at times he could rise up with the anger of a lion when he saw an injustice. He was complex. He was adaptive. He was aware. And you always marveled at that. And then after 3 years, you and your friends went to Jerusalem really for the very first time. And you remembered that first day, and when you gathered in Jerusalem and Jesus preached in the temple. He didn't really preach that first day, that Sunday. He stirred things up. He was pretty angry with what he saw. But then over the next 3 days, you continued to follow Jesus and pay attention to his every move. And over those next 3 days, he held court at the temple. He preached, he taught, he listened, he observed, and you watched him. In the midst of all of it, you could sense that the atmospherics of it all were changing. You could feel a tension in the air in the midst of the excitement. You knew deep down that things were changing. It'd never be the same again. And then today, this afternoon, he invited you to go to a place in downtown Jerusalem for a meal. You walked up those steps into what you understood was the upper room, and you sat down. You looked at each other, you looked at the disciples, you looked at Jesus, and then all of a sudden he did something remarkable. He began to wash your feet. And you couldn't believe it. He was on his hands and knees, and he was washing your feet, and he was looking up at you, kneeling on the ground. He was looking up, and he looked into your eyes, and he made you feel like you've never felt before. Special, not only special, it's not the right word, but sacred. You'll never forget that look as long as you live. And then, of course, he tried to wash Peter's feet, and that was a little bit different. And Peter struggled with it a little bit, and everybody was chuckling, but Peter finally accepted it. It was hard for him, but his feet were washed as well. And then after that, after your feet were washed, and you're just taking this whole thing in, Jesus starts to pray as only Jesus could pray. And you heard him pray for unity, for people being connected. You heard him pray to the Father that he was grateful that he and the Father were one. He was grateful that he was able to share the Father's every hope with those who were in his midst. He was amazed at that relationship, and then he began to pray for himself and for you, for the disciples, and he prayed that he and you would be connected just as he and the Father was connected. That this space, this holy energy between you would start to flow in a powerful way. That you would be able to be his hands and feet when his day would finally come to an end. And he prayed even further. He prayed not only for you, but he prayed for the next generation of people that you would serve. That they too would unite. That they too would be blessed by the Spirit. That they too would recognize how sacred they were and how much they were loved and how much God loved all people. And in a sense, the prayer just kept going on and on. And as you listen to those prayers, you imagine that you were already in eternity. That those prayers would go on and on and on. Finally, you had a meal. And it was curious. You had a meal, and Jesus took bread, he broke it, and gave it to you and to all the disciples. And he said that this bread is my body that is given for you. And then after the meal, he took a cup. He said, this cup is my blood shed for you and for all people for the forgiveness of sin. And he said, do this and remember me. Well, the meal had ended. And he got up from where he was sitting, and he started to head out of the room and down the stairs, and he invited you to follow him. And you did. You went out. It was dark by now. Really, really dark. But the stars were so bright. The contrast between the darkness of the night and the stars of the sky just were breathtaking. And he went into a garden, and like he always did, he began to pray. You struggled to stay awake. You're tired. It had been a tough week. So tired. And then all of a sudden you heard a crowd of people coming from the east into that little garden, and all of a sudden you saw your old friend Judas talking with Jesus, and before you knew it, he was arrested. He was arrested and taken away. He disappeared. He was gone. And you noticed they were heading back up the Mount of Olives just a little bit, and you wondered what would happen next. You later realized that, later in the night, you realized he was taken to Caiaphas's home, but ended up in a dungeon overnight. He had been whipped 39 lashes, and then he spent the night in a dungeon. Well, you ended back up in the upper room with all your other friends, save a couple. Peter wasn't there yet, and of course Judas was long gone. And so, exhausted, tired, confused, afraid, you curled up in a corner and you went to sleep, wondering what would come next. Amen.